11 Langdale Capital Assets on Coleman Road. This involves 719 acres. It is currently CC, R1, and conservation. The request is for M1 and conservation, and this would be served by county utilities. Mr. Bill.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. The applicant requested M1 and conservation zoning, which prompted staff to look at the allowed uses for M1. Again, predominantly light manufacturing. The main differentiator between this M1 and commercial zoning, which is otherwise allowed, is generally the size of the buildings allowed. You'll notice here that permissible uses include activities, warehousing, assembly, storage, and commercial services, but does not allow for excessive noise, odor, smoke, or dust, or the storage of hazardous materials. That would require a separate hearing for the M2 district, so just wanted to point that out. Again, we also looked, like I said, at the use table here. You see the commercial uses which are allowed, P being permissible by right, and especially down here on the left-hand side, the light industry with total cumulative building square footage under 30,000 square feet, and then over 30,000 square feet is really where we get into the need for an M1 request here. Anything with an industrial nuisance or odor or anything like that is not allowed in M1, as you'll see on the top of the right-hand slide there. That does require M2 or higher zoning. So, with that being said, staff looks at the current zoning pattern around here, noting the CC and the R1 conservation, along with Cooch River there, Foxborough subdivision to your north, and then Steep Range, low density residential to the south. Future land use does depict it as an industrial activity center, and then we talked about community activity center, conservation, recreation, suburban, and transportation utilities character areas, as this property is split by Norfolk Southern Railroad, which is a double track through this area. There are wetlands on this property, and again, these are based on the 2008 FEMA flood maps, which we'll get into in just a little bit because of this. So I want to pause and take a look here. Again, you notice some pocket isolated wetlands. You know wetlands to the south, down to Steep Range. You also notice the blue line stream abutting Foxborough subdivision. This is an overall depiction of the property in both tracks, roughly seen 720 acres here. You'll also notice a dashed, jagged edge. That is the proposed 2021 FEMA floodplain maps. And I'll zoom in here to note just how different they are compared to the 2008 maps and where the conservation zoning line appears here. This comes into factor when we look if the 2021 flood maps will be adopted in the future and conservation boundaries were to change. This potential tract should have approximately 152 of its 390 acres changed to conservation. Again, this is a possibility. This has not been approved, but just for reference regarding the environmental sensitive wetland areas to the east. Again, I want to jump back to this area along Foxborough subdivision. You'll notice that a 200-foot buffer there on the left is one of the conditions that's being proposed, and you'll see why. That 200 feet more or less covers the western extent of that blue line stream, and the southern, obviously, it extends further south. The more you get away towards the east of Rustic Ridge, potentially 500 to 700 feet. And again, this is the undisturbed buffer that is being proposed at 200 feet. Potential change, again, to the conservation boundary could be up to almost 25 acres, more or less. This is how that proposed 200-foot buffer, which is staff's recommended condition, looks along the Foxborough subdivision. We go to the southern portion of this tract, again along Steep Range. Again, 200-foot undisturbed buffer. And then the southern portion, which is currently zoned CC, again, here are those wetlands that are on the southwest corner there. So this is the proposed 200-foot buffers along both tracks, north and south. And based on the applicant's request for a large warehouse type campus, this is the Lowe's distribution center here off Bill Hartman. That building is 1,123,280 square feet. Worst case scenario, you're looking at a little over 6.5 million square feet of building. Again, fully built out. Just for some scale and reference here. With that being said, staff is recommending the following conditions. One, there shall be no access to Briarberry Drive and Quail Hollow Circle from the subject property. Those are the two roads in Foxborough. Should a change in use occur where additional transportation and or water sewer infrastructure upgrades are required, the developer will be responsible for the design, any acquisition of necessary right-of-way, relocation of utilities, and construction costs for the infrastructure improvements. All lots shall front interior roads. Number 4, this is the 200-foot undisturbed buffer, shall be required along the northern-southern property lines abutting the residential zoning districts. 5, any lighting located on the property shall be shielded and directed to avoid direct illumination of adjacent property zoned residentially. 6, any loudspeakers, paging system, or electromagnetic interference generated on or by uses of the property shall be designed, installed, and used such that they are not discernible at any abutting property line zoned residentially. And number 7, correctional facilities, transitional care facilities, and kennels with outdoor runs shall not be allowed. Those were the 7 staff proposed conditions at the planning commission meeting. Several of the neighbors who were there did speak in opposition to the request, again citing concerns about the potential environmental impacts and proposed buffers being adequate, any additional traffic on Coleman and North Valdosta, possibility of hazardous materials and pollutants. And therefore, after hearing all this, followed up with a few questions to staff, did recommend approval with the 7 conditions by a split vote of 4 to 3.
Any questions for Mr. Dillon?
At the end, after the vote 4-3, there's another footnote, I guess, developments of regional impact or large-scale developments that are likely to have regional effects beyond the local government jurisdiction. What would that be?
Yes, sir. DCA has standards for the development of regional impacts, typically anything over 400 acres or certain building square footage size. Because this property is 700 acres, we did contact the regional commission to advance this. They said, based on the acreage, yes, it would be required, but as there is no proposed tenant right now, the additional information required by a DRI would be kind of moot and pointless to fill out because it does require things like traffic counts, build out infrastructure, water and sewer usage, things like that. But since there is no proposed tenant at this time, the DRI is noted and would have to be completed depending on the final user.
Yeah, Jerry, is there a letter of intent calculated in this packet?
Not at this time. The applicant had stated in the meeting that he was hopefully targeting a data center as their proposed tenant, but again, some of these conditions here, especially number 2, if something were to change, staff wanted to leave it open, and that's why we included the additional M1 allowed uses in your packet. But there's not a proposed final tenant for this request at the time.
No real plan.
JD, I think it's important, like you stated, that no hazardous material can be stored or transported or created with the M1 status. Some people, with it being close to the river and backing up the residential, have that concern, but that level eliminates that worry. And what you're also saying is, in a data center possibly wouldn't cause a lot of traffic issues, but if they do develop something like Lowe's distribution, the developer would have to have the cost of widening Coleman Road or any improvements that may be caused because of trucks and things.
Correct.
Thank you. Commissioners, also keep in mind, but I know there's been a lot of discussion, and I went to the planning commission meeting as well, as Mr. Smith did. The challenge that sometimes that we have as commissioners, and certainly challenges that the planning commission has as well, is that our responsibility is not necessarily a what project. Our responsibility is land use and what is allowed in M1, M2, or M3. So really, based on what is allowed in M1 is very light. It's just strictly pretty much warehousing buildings and structures such as that. And so my understanding is that the applicant is just trying to prepare this piece of property to make it enticing, because a lot of times when an industry comes in, they're looking at a piece of property. Sometimes the challenge and the big thing that puts the roadblock up right initially is the rezoning requirements to try to get property rezoned. So they're trying to be proactive on this piece of property and move forward by rezoning it ahead of time. Now, that's still no guarantee that if an applicant, a prospect comes up that doesn't fit M1, you could see it again for that matter. But bottom line is right now they're asking for M1. And I think that anything, as you can see here with the 7 conditions and then what's allowed in M1, this property is ideally suited for that.
Mr. Chairman, I was wondering, by being so close to 75, really, I'm
what are the conditions that we need to enforce on this piece of property, and you have to somehow kind of spotlight that. But I don't see these, I mean, a lot of this is really kind of naturally taking care of itself. For example, the 200-foot buffer. Mr. Dillard, normally, what would be the buffer requirement on a piece of property such as this, in a normal situation?
Yes, sir. The minimum buffer requirement for M1 is only 40 feet between residential. So this is 5 times the normal amount, which is more than even our M3. M3 is 3 times the normal amount. So staff is believed, again, based on the speculative nature and the size of this property, 5 times the minimum buffer is more than adequate to handle any proposed use that's allowed in M1.
I think we need to know exactly what this intention is as far as light manufacturing, or if it's just warehousing. When you have warehousing, you have a lot of trucks coming in and out, because that's a turnaround point. And that Coleman Road, like Mr. Smith said, is probably not up to speed for all that heavy truck traffic. That would need to be taken care of.
Mr. Dillard, do you have in front of you, don't, and certainly we can have it prior to tomorrow evening's meeting, what are the specifics that are allowed in M1?
Yes, sir. The M1 land uses are in your packets. Again, it's rather extensive, going through the entire land use chart. Like I said, I noted a few of them, mainly the industrial uses regarding warehouses, but all of them are in your packets. So again, it looks kind of like this. Overall, it's about 10 pages of the land uses there.
Any other questions?
Thank you for all the effort in preparing this.
Again, I just have concerns with some of the conditions, we talk about the lights and this and that, and you really tie hands, but again, it's.
Well, a lot of those conditions are normally, in my opinion, a lot of times is what we kind of look for from an engineering standpoint of what's required on any kind of development. We try to keep the lighting all focused to the inside of the piece of property so it doesn't overspill on somebody else's property, those sort of things. I mean, those are just normal things, and they're just bringing them up, to highlight them here on those 7 conditions. I don't have any issues with the 7 conditions, because a lot of them are just kind of naturally taking care of themselves. But again, if you want to include the conditions, then that is certainly your prerogative to do that. So I think that, I think with the fact that the property owner is trying to be proactive in getting something ready for future development in our community, I think that's a positive thing. Rather than them getting somebody that's interested in a piece of property, and then we're having to go through this whole process of rezoning a piece of property. Now, let me add one other thing that came out of the meeting, and Mr. Smith, you can verify this. Most of the people that were speaking against, I think there was maybe 4 or 5 that spoke against it, were Foxborough residents, but they were more concerned with the activity up on North Valdosta Road on the Mockley property, where they're clearing those trees, than they are with this development right here. So they kind of connected it all together when it's really 2 separate developments.
I agree with that.
Any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Dillard. All right, we'll move on to agenda item